Hi everyone, so for today's creative quarantine post, I thought it would be fun to play around with some mixed media artwork. So here I'm mixing collage, painting, and embroidery. And in case you're all wondering, why yes, I did put on lipstick and a sweater to match my embroidery artwork because what else am I going to do in quarantine? So this embroidery artwork is inspired by Bear tattoos. I tried to choose small geometrical shapes that would be easy to follow along for beginners who haven't played around with embroidery before. But you could use these same techniques to do maybe a flower embroidery, like a flower crown, like Frida Kahlo, or other types of geometrical patterns, any type of embroidery you like. And for the picture, of course, instead of using something from a magazine, you could always do a picture of yourself or someone you know, someone in your family. So lots of things to mix and match with this one here. So I'm going to start off by choosing the subject of my artwork. So here what I'm looking for is a close-up shot of a face, a close-up portrait, and just any magazine ad will do. Something where the face is big enough so that your stitches won't have to be too close together. Now, I like this one, but I decided to cut the background off, and here I'm mounting it onto a thicker sheet of paper. This is 160 GSM that I'm using now, and the reason I'm mounting it onto paper is that if you're using only magazine paper, it's a little bit flimsy. It would probably end up ripping when you do the embroidery. And plus it's a little bit see-through, so you wouldn't want to see the messy backwork of the embroidery through the paper. Since my white background here is a little bit plain, I decided to spruce it up by adding some painting on the background. So just kind of some rough brush strokes here. It's just to give a little bit of extra texture. And once it's dry, I'm going to glue my photo on. Now that everything's set up, I am ready to do my artwork. So here I'm using Bear tattoos as an inspiration. I really like how they're pretty similar to cross stitch. They kind of remind me of Palestinian embroidery as well. It's nice to use geometrical shapes. I think they're a little bit easier to do in embroidery, especially for beginners. So I'm sketching lightly with a pencil, so it's not super visible on the video here because I want to erase it once I pierce the holes. But it's just a rough sketch of the placement that I'm going to need for the holes. Okay, and now we're ready to pierce the holes. So here I'm using a thumbtack. You could also use your needle directly, and I placed my paper over a bulletin board just to make it easier to pierce through, but it's not completely necessary. And I'm piercing holes at the tips of each of the lines and at the intersections. So each hole should probably be not more than 3 or 4 millimeters apart. That's like a classic stitch length. There we go. So if you're using embroidery thread, which I'm using here, normally embroidery thread is made up of 6 strands that can be separated. On my first trial, I used the full 6 strands, and it was a little bit thick, made kind of big holes in the paper. So I think you're actually better off splitting it into 3 strands. You don't necessarily have to use embroidery floss. You could also use any normal string that you have lying around. I've even done some with some normal sewing thread that I've doubled up. So don't be worried if you don't have any at home. So I'm going to start off by making a knot at the end of my thread. Just a simple regular knot, and that's so that the thread doesn't slip through the paper while I'm embroidering. There we go. And for the needle, I'm using a medium size. Avoid using something that's too big. It might make pretty big holes in your paper. So I'm going to start off from the back side here. So that's because we don't want to see the knot that I just made at the end. And I'm going to pierce through one of the holes that I'd made before. I can see I'm having a little bit of trouble bringing the needle through the paper here, and that's because this is when I was using the full 6 strands. Afterwards I switched to 3 and it was much more seamless. Okay, so once you pull the thread all the way through, I'm not doing any particular stitch, I'm really just following the lines that I had drawn before. So I'm just checking in which direction the line goes and putting my needle into that next hole that the line finishes at and pulling all the way through. Be sure to always pull all the way through, otherwise you'll probably end up with some knots at the back of your paper. Okay, just speeding things up a little bit for you. And there we go, almost done, just the last stitch to do. And then I'll show you how to finish up the embroidery really quick. So to secure the thread, I'm just putting my needle underneath the last stitch and then pulling it through the loop. So it's really basically just like a regular knot. Here I've actually done a double knot. And then I'm going to cut off the excess thread. And there we go, all done. This technique is super flexible, so I'm really excited to see what versions you guys come up with. Happy crafting!